failing. And we both work with kids who are in the system, like aggregate care, like foster youth, and those tend to be higher rates of queer, Black, brown, Indigenous kids. And so we were just talking about how the school system is really failing these kids. And I was like, someone's got to like really do something about this. And like with a straight face, she's like, you're somebody. And literally we left that lunch to the courthouse, picked up petitions because the office they were running, it just happened to be and within 72 hours I had my signatures and I was on the ballot. So that was literally what happened.
Okay, so the more we talk, the more I realize how similar we are, because that would be absolutely a Leo move. Like, someone calls me out, they're like, yo, you're someone, and I'm like, ah, shit, I am someone. Let's go get a petition.
Right, exactly.
Hi, my name's Leo WT, and you have found your way to the Conversations podcast. Conversations exist to create spiritually minded conversations about life. We desire to create safe space for dialogue and community. We desire to come together regularly and intentionally to generate conversations about life, belief, and the intersection of the two. Everyone is welcome at the conversation.
All right, my friends, I am Leo WT. If you're here, there is a really good chance you've seen me before, but I do have a new, awesome, fantastic friend on the chat tonight. So I just want to say hi to you and let you know that we are here with Tyler Titus. They are going to introduce themselves here in just a minute, but I did want to give you a quick note. We still will be chatting with ABO Comics. We just had to reschedule due to a technical difficulty on my end. But that will be up probably Tuesday. So we'll be back with that in a couple of days. But for now, I am getting to chat with someone who I've really been waiting to chat with for quite some time. So this is Conversations, and we're going to be talking about being a queer leader and being the change you wish to see in the world. And I'm going to let Tyler introduce themselves.
That's a nice, long, lofty title with the change you want to see in the world, right?
I tried to set the bar high. You know what I'm saying?
That's really inspiring. That is really inspiring. So yes, Tyler Titus, they, them, their pronouns. I always start it with yes. I am from Titusville. So I am Tyler Titus from Titusville. I don't know the namesake of there. I'm sure that it is. But I've never really tracked it down. Right now, I am currently seated as the Erie City School Board President, serve as on the Pennsylvania Commission of Affairs, and I'm running for Erie County Executive. But the coolest things about me are probably the humans that you'll probably inevitably hear in the background. I have a kiddo here, and my wife is upstairs, and we've got really loud pets. So perfect. They're going to join the fun, I'm sure, at some point.
Absolutely. I think when in 2020, which has really just bled into 2021, facts of life are there will be Zoom and there will be pets and children in it. And that's A-okay, because where the weirdest thing is that we're all like whole beings. And I think in 2020 and 2021, one of the biggest things that we learned about everybody in our worlds is that like we are more than just what you see at work, because all of a sudden you're seeing us in our settings and you're seeing our people and our pictures and our decorations and our, our sweatshirts and stuff like that. And I think it's actually been kind of cool to see other people in context. You know what I mean?
So. Absolutely. I fully agree.
Awesome. So I had a sense that you were pretty chill and that we could just vibe out. And so I didn't come up with any sort of flow for this conversation, but that's actually why I chose the name Conversations for this group and podcast and YouTube channel, is because conversation is defined as, a dialogue between two or more parties that has to proceed in some extent in a spontaneous manner. So here we are. And I think the best things come out of that. But let's start with the reason that I really, really wanted to talk to you. And that reason is, I've become really convinced that if you're going to have any belief system, period, religious, a-religious, moral, ethical, like however you define your belief system, it has to interface with your daily life, right? Yes. And I think that for me, as I felt more disenfranchised from the church, right, when I was growing up, I felt more of a draw to work in areas of social justice and local politics, because those were the tangible places to make a difference in my area. And I think I think is really, really cool that you have stepped up and really begun to be a part of the local political system in your area, because I think, frankly, there's no bigger way to make a change. So, how did you get to? How did you get to be the school board president? Like, let's start with the seat that you
Yeah,
hold right
yeah.
now.
So, in true Tyler fashion, I was sitting with one of my friends who's a guardian med lighting here in the local area, and we had met over lunch. And we were like just like cribbing or complaining about our local school, like and
Mhm.
how it was like kind of failing. And we both worked with kids who were in the system, like aggregate care, like foster youth, and those tend to be higher rates of queer, Black, brown, Indigenous kids. And
Mhm.
so we were just talking about how the school system is really failing these kids. And
Mhm.
and I was like, someone's got to like really do something about this. And like with a straight face, she's like, "You're somebody." And
Oh.
literally we left that lunch to the courthouse, picked up petitions because the office they were running, it just happened to be we like this, and within 72 hours I had my signatures and I was on the ballot. So that was
Wow.
literally what happened.
Okay, so the more we talk, the more I realize how similar we are, because that would be absolutely a Leo move. Like, someone calls me out, they're like, "Yo, you're someone," and I'm like, "Ah, shit, I am someone. Let's go get a
Right,
petition." You know what
exactly.
I
And
mean?
so let's put it. And
Did you
that's literally what happened.
did you have any political experience before you decided to run?
Nope. Only like in the advocacy realm. So I have worked as an activist really since I came to Erie in 2003. Honestly, even before that. So when I was in Titusville, I was, that teen that was like marching in DC on the streets for at Big Tobacco and the liquor companies for targeting youth.
Mhm.
And so that was like kind of my burst in, was more on the activism, learning how to be like within just, a convincer, getting people to like listen to what we're
Mhm.
saying.
Mhm.
And honestly, I just said that I always wanted to be on the other side. I didn't want to follow the rules that all the politicians had to follow. But then I learned how important it is, though, to get in and change the rules, right?
Right.
If you don't like the rules, and they're oppressing certain groups, the only way that those rules are going to change is if oppressed people get within those positions.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of where it came. Like, to use power, with power has privilege, right? Our power, and there's privilege and power, but then there's also responsibility and accountability in power.
Mhm.
And I think the true definition of a good leader is somebody who is willing to spread that power out,
Mhm.
and use it to empower others.
Mhm.
And I know myself to be, that's kind of like what motivates me and drives me.
Yeah.
It's not to be the face or the center, but to use my platform to then like reverberate out and to
Right.
pull others forward.
Yo, I'm telling you, everything you say, because I've come to understand my own passion. Well, first of all, people have been at me left, right, and center, like, you should run for office, you should run for office, you should run for office. And I really, really thought about it. But at the moment, man, there's some people here in our local government that need to be called out. And I feel like someone needs to call them out without having to worry about getting votes, right? And
Yeah.
so I'm kind of functioning in what I would like to call a parapolitical role right now, which is being heavily involved in local government, but not running. So it's funny that you
Hmm.
said that, because like there is a need for people to run. But one of the things that I've really been able to kind of circle around to is this idea of building other people up. Like, I'm a very passionate individual, and for some reason, people want to listen to me. And so I'm trying to use that right now to raise up minority youth and young people and encourage them to chase their passions, right? So right
Hmm.
now I'm trying to work with the Olean Regional Justice Coalition, other local coalitions in our area, to kind of build up that interest, especially in minority and disenfranchised communities, because
Yeah, absolutely.
Olean's a town of like 13,500. We're declining every year. And the health incomes and the wage gaps and everything, they're so real. And
Hmm.
we've got to take a stand and make a change somehow. We have to. We have to.
Absolutely. And so I think that there's a piece of what you just said that I don't want to like for us to just like move on from. And that is that sometimes people need to be called out in a way that might stop people from voting from them or
Mhm.
voting for them. And I think that that is also an important role. And my
Mhm.
wife has often said to me that the most influential leaders are actually not ones in elected office. And so I've kind of like gone back and forth with that, because
Mhm.
both really matter, right?
Mhm.
Both really matter. My wife has never had the desire to be in politics, and was even just like, man, now I'm going to be married to somebody who is in politics. I'm not sure what to do with that, but she is somebody who's like behind the scenes and really likes to hold people, and like she's going to hold you accountable. She's going to call you out on what you said, but both are equally as important.
Yeah, and you have to have that partnership. So for me, I've been focusing on really building a relationship with my particular alderman, and then some of the older aldermen are in our area because we have some really interesting social dynamics happening in Olean, in so much as like we're a town of 13,500, but we're the urban center for about an hour radius around us.
Yeah.
So like we have a chance to really make a difference. And we're at a spot right now where Olean has their first Black alderman. He was appointed this past year after we really kind of turned some screws and put some pressure on some openly racist aldermen that we had in our town. And we've got some new fresh leadership, and we're at a precipice where things could tip. And so I think that's why I was really excited to get you on in particular, because when people see presidential elections and Congress and senators, it's really easy to see that and then be like, but what do I do? Like, how do my votes matter? But I almost think that we have a lot to learn in terms of like how much change you can make as a county executive or as a school board president. Would you give us like maybe a little bit of insight into some reasons that it's been important to run for like in the school district, or some things that you've been able to work on in that arena?
So I think it's important to note that the imposter syndrome, right? Is we see these people up there and we presume that we don't have what it takes to be within the political arena, or that we don't deserve a seat at the table. But when we unpack where a lot of these people come from, we see a whole lot of cis white privilege, like that just assume that they're best for it. Like like having our federal legislature be primarily made up of like car salesmen, you know what I mean? Like, or you know, like salespeople. And so they don't have a background anymore other than the fact that they're really good at reading an audience, and can really get people to buy into what they're saying, right? But for me, like why it really mattered was representation. Representation is everything. I had 2 suicide attempts prior to graduating high school, and it was because I could not see myself or hear myself or believe in myself, and through any of the stories, the historical context. I wasn't in any TV shows. I wasn't in any of the books that we read, unless we were the butt of the joke, right? Queer people were always the ones who were like the plot twist, or you know, that like threw this like weird like screw into the mix,
or the murdered sex worker,
right. That's who we are, right? And like you think of Ace Ventura, Pet Detective, right? That was one of my favorite movies growing up. And it wasn't until just recently that I was like, holy shit. Yeah. And had to unpack like this message that I was carrying with me.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so when you get people who have the intersectional identity within positions of power, who are able to then influence policy, to unpack how these policies and procedures and legislature impact marginalized and oppressed communities, it matters, because we can give voice and perspective where other people aren't going to slow down. They're just not going to slow down, or they're intentionally causing the harm. And so that's why it matters. That's why it matters.
It's so true. That representation is huge, because like there's so many of us, like, so you and I right now, like real talk, like we could pass as cis white men, right? So we still have a layer, we still have privilege, right? And I think that everybody has layers of privilege, and it's a real thing. And it's also not a negative, right? Because we can use our assumed this het white male status. Like you can run and have someone look at your campaign flyer and not right away go like, fucking queer. You know what I mean? But then they see you, right? And it's already been accessible. So you have, like, you and I would have a unique position, whereas well, you're slightly less tattooed than me. So like I stick out
only above.
I
just what you see on screen.
I just started in this. So. But we have a chance to be almost like an intermediary, right? Because we have areas of intersectional marginalization, but also areas of intersectional privilege. And I think it's super important for people to get out there and to be a mirror with which young queer youth can see themselves, and to be a mirror with which other marginalized people can see themselves, because really no one minority is going to be able to make a complete change. Like our liberation is bound up together. And so
Right.
if we're able to inspire marginalized youth in an intersectional fashion, like then we can really start to make change. You know what I mean?
Absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. And I think that the system is working the way the system was designed, and that is to pivot oppressed and marginalized people against each other. Because when
Yes.
we are pivoting against each other and fighting for the same resources,
Mm-hmm.
everyone else gets, they, you know what I mean? They get to
Yep.
just keep and maintain the power.
It's artificial scarcity, man. I can't believe we
Mhm.
haven't talked for so long. It's like I'm talking to myself, which by that I mean you're super funny and smart and got good jokes. So, but no, you're so right. It's an artifact. It's an artificial and manufactured sense of scarcity. It's so
Mhm.
much like, well, really, it's the bait and switch hallmark of our country, because originally race didn't even exist, right?
Right.
But poor white people who worked as indentured servants, and by white I don't mean as a race, I mean people whose skin was white, right? So
Mhm.
poor people with light skin who were indentured servants, and poor people with brown skin who were forced into slavery, those two groups got together and they launched an insurgence when the capital was still in Virginia. And the powers that be, the cis het white straight dudes who were happened to be Christians, were like, bro, we cannot let these people work together. And that story and narrative has reverberated throughout our whole history, whether it's Bloods versus Crips, whether it's Black people versus gay people, whether it's like everybody versus Mexicans. Like they
Mhm.
have just, and by they I don't mean like a cool trendy person who has gender neutral pronouns. I mean the system, like you said, the
Mhm.
system is doing exactly what it's supposed to be. And so there's this weird paradox, right, where we have to either play one of two roles. We have to be an outside irritant, or we have to do what you're doing and go into the system. Because until
Mhm.
someone goes into the system and just kind of like, I just had the best image in my head of like sticking a twig through a bike tire. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like,
Mhm.
someone's got to go in the
Mhm.
system and be like, boop.
Yeah, and yeah, you're exactly right. You're exactly right. And to like even like elaborate a little bit, like, you know, when we had the indentured servants and we had those who were forced into slavery, what did we do? We literally empowered one over the other to then
Mhm.
go arrest those. And like and there is born the police system.
Exactly.
And that is why when people are talking about reform with the you know, or abolition, it's
Mhm.
because the very fundamental roots were pitting, you know, indentured against, you know,
Enslaved. Yeah.
enslaved.
Yeah.
And so when the system was built to, you know, take down Black and brown people and indigenous people, we have to reform it. We absolutely have to reform it. And we do that. We do that by getting people who have those lived experience, the true context of history,
Mhm.
into those spaces so they can dispel the myths, which sucks. Again, it sucks that the oppressed people are again doing the heavy lift.
Exactly.
Again, doing the heavy lift.
Exactly. And I don't know, God, it really does suck, because like at this point, like especially Black and brown people, women, queer people, like these communities have been doing the heavy lifting of trying to educate people for so long about, you know, our own respective existences, right? And then we still got to go in there and do the work. And I think that this was my hope with this summer, is that we could pass a critical precipice where people of privilege would start realizing their privilege and siding with people with power. And
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think we're starting to see that, but I think that we cannot rely on the people that are already in power to fight for us at some point. So while it sucks that there's still heavy lifting to be done by minority communities, like the reality is the system isn't rotten, the system is healthy. And
Yeah.
unless we go in
Mhm.
there and switch things up, man, like who is going to do it? You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yep.
That
You're
lived
absolutely right.
experience in that context is so huge. So it's so
Hmm.
huge. What are some of the things that you've been able to work on via your position in the school board in terms of kind of dismantling that oppressive system?
So having a seat at the table is, I think, it's really important because we can start pointing out who else is not at the table and should be at the table.
Mm-hmm.
We can start like there's a lot of racism that happens within the public education system. A lot. It's like it's founded on, you know, segregation still happens. But we just now do it through funding. and where we push in who we won't like allow in schools, and tax rates, right? So we make certain neighborhoods impossible for other people to live in. We don't hire them at better jobs, so they're stuck. And then those are also the schools that happen to be, pulling from that same funding bucket, and trying to do the same kind of work with families who are enduring complex trauma. So like minority stress model, in addition to daily living. But when I'm at the table, or when I've been at the table, I've been able to partner with some of the others who were doing the work. And now, because I have lighter skin, I can say, no, actually, this is a problem. And it's taken with a little bit more seriousness, which is, it's unfortunate. And again, like you said, using my privilege and my access to the advantage of making sure conversations are heard. And then once like I've clapped and we've got the attention, to turn it to mic pass.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because that's critical.
It's so critical. And I sometimes struggle with that too. Because like you said, like I have light skin, like I have in some ways an unfair advantage, but it is, like you said, I love that, like you explained, like getting that clap and getting that attention. And sometimes I think there's a lot of room too to hold space, right? Because sometimes we do have to use our voice, because unfortunately this party or that party is not represented yet at the table. And so I like to think of it as like, I'm trying to know when to not speak, but also when that I need to speak, so as to hold space verbally for the conversation to progress. Because I definitely am someone who like speaking. I don't have a ton of skills in life. I just talk really good. And so that's like, people think that I have a lot more skills than I do, but really I'm just a good talker. I could have been a used car salesman. Thank goodness I have some sort of like morals. I can't just do it. You know what I mean? But I sometimes feel that tension too. And so I like that analogy you used of kind of metaphorically clapping to get the attention focused where it needs to be. Because I think that's important too. I don't want people to feel like, oh, I can't talk because I have lighter skin. But I also do want people to know, like, the attention needs to be here at this moment, whatever that is, maybe. And I think your head has to be on a swivel too, because there are there's complex social trauma. There are areas where people are traumatized and marginalized in multiple, compounded.
Absolutely. Yes.
And that, those are the things that really, like you mentioned, your traumatic experience in high school, RE mental health, those compounding areas of trauma are the things that we have to begin to pull back layer by layer. And
Absolutely.
we have to do it by whatever means, whether it's speaking or not speaking,
Absolutely. I think you really nailed it. And then to also look at spiritual and religious trauma, like my father was a youth pastor, and I would go to youth group. And then as I started kind of like piecing things together, and who I am as a person, my authentic self, starting to realize this space where I had sought so much comfort, was like, I started mourning. Like I had to mourn the loss of that space, because I could tell that I was no longer going to be welcomed in these spaces, like by the dialogue that was happening, by the body language, by the jokes, by all these closed door conversations. And so, like, while simultaneously wanting to celebrate who I am as a human, grieving the people that I have all these shared lived experiences with, and these memories, and it compounds and it's complex. And I think that the same thing happens when there's multiple intersections of identity. And I know, like, that's things that get thrown around a lot, but I think it's really important to bring that back. Is sometimes people have to sacrifice being true to themselves to be in a space safely. And then also they have to be like, this is the best as it's going to get right now for me. So even though it's toxic, harmful environment, there are no other alternatives.
Right.
And because I've heard people be like, well, you just need to be you. And I'm just like, there's a lot of privilege in being able to say, just be you, because that's not, some people can't, because they'll be killed. And so that's true. Not like an exaggeration, or they'll be homeless, or they're going to be, sexually assaulted. And so sometimes you can't be you.
That's so true.
And there's no shame in that.
Yeah, no, that's so true. And I feel like that's definitely I mean, that's an experience that has to resonate, or that's an idea that has to resonate with people of color. Like, my son is trans and is Black, and so I very quickly went from having like a young Black teenage daughter to an effeminate Black male teenage son, and that is, in some regards, one of the most terrifying things I've ever experienced, because initially I wasn't worried. And that showed my privilege, because my partner, who happens to be brown, was like, you do realize we have a Black son now, right? And so in some spaces, like you said, it is safer for my son to be stealth. And I think those are the moments when we need to speak up, is when we recognize that it is safer for us to speak up than for someone else to speak up. And you have to look at that with intersectional moments of justice too. You have to look at it, because it's always going to be safer for the white females to be in the front line at a protest, but not using their voice, literally using their bodies and their privilege as white females to be literally a shield between Black individuals and police forces. It has to happen. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And the same is true with, Indigenous or Native American people who have been at the front lines, literally have been here and have been, arm locked with every social movement, and how so often we have completely negated what we have done, or what they have then given back to the very people who are murdering them.
Absolutely.
And how they have shown up to fight for social and moral justice issues, inequities, and we are still, we do the same thing. We do the same thing to Black and brown women too, especially Black and brown trans women. We just plow right over. And when they have been at the forefront, often starting the very movements that have changed all of our lives. And we're not showing up in the same ways. We're just not.
Exactly. No, you're 100% true. And you have to we have to give credence to that, right? Because even within our community, right, of saying queer community, like we still have more privilege than, like a Black or Indigenous trans person. And we have to realize those overlapping areas of both privilege and marginalization. And I think it's really important to note that it's, the most dangerous category of human to exist within, that you could find yourself within, is to be a Black or brown trans woman. But I say that with the caveat of, we haven't even begun to quantify the danger of being an Indigenous woman or an Indigenous trans woman, because there's been atrocities that have literally just not been statistically represented for Indigenous women in both America and Canada. And so we have to be able to maneuver ourselves into positions of influence so that we can create that change. You know what I mean? And the reality is that sometimes if I look like a straight white man, I might be able to maneuver into a position more easily than someone who is either not interested or doesn't have the privilege to be able to pass in society. So we've got to step up, and we've got to step up and say, in local school boards, you got to say, is this working for everybody, or is it working for someone who it looks like you? You know what I mean?
Yep. Absolutely. You're spot on. Right. Yes.
I feel like there's so many moments where our mayor here, and this is where we'll transition a little bit from school to kind of more let's say local, municipal government or county government, is our mayor here is a cis white heterosexual straight male who is a Catholic and who used to be our police chief. And he is comfortable saying that we don't need a police reform board. And he's comfortable saying that we don't have an issue with racism. And he's comfortable looking over a very highly qualified female candidate for alderman replacement because she's not a part of his political party. And so there needs to be a way, when you see corruption on that local level, there needs to be a way for you to stand up and use your voice and your privilege. And that might be, it might be speaking, it might be protesting, but those are the things we got to stand up and protest, because those are the areas where I don't think it's a blind spot. I think it is an intentional ignorance of the other, and someone has to stand up and say, bro, you are a joke right now.
Absolutely. So we had over the summer, we had an incident during the protests that were happening. I don't even like to use the word protest, like the movement, like the uprising, like like the hurt. We were watching the hurt come out in the streets as a form of grief and suffering. Like that's what we were saying. So I think protest is so belittling, but that's the English language, and that's what we have.
Yeah.
But where an officer kicked a young white woman who was sitting in the streets, just sitting in the streets, a peaceful protest, after like getting her to move and like boot to heel, like kicked her so hard in the face. And there was, I was disgusted. As everybody else was, we're just disgusted with what we saw unravel. And the response from our mayor, he's a kind-hearted person. He comes to our pride events, and he has a gay son, and he's very proud of his gay son. But I was really just disheartened because there was this moment of opportunity to stand in solidarity.
Yep.
And to put yourself at risk of maybe not being reelected, of maybe losing political capital, but to show that you stand on the right side of things.
Yeah.
And he didn't. He missed a moment. And using my privilege, I was the president of his advisory board, on the queer advisory board. And I publicly resigned. I waited until the next city council meeting, and I didn't tell anybody I was doing it. And I just on the spot blasted and said, these are all the reasons why I resigned. And read off the names, and it caused a huge divide. People like, but this mayor shows up at the Pride Parade. He marches with us. He raises the flag. And I'm like, but if we are not there in solidarity with our Black and brown, especially our Black, brown, Indigenous, queer individuals, it doesn't matter. This like showing up at a Pride Parade that was started by Black and brown people is for naught.
It is absolutely for naught. Absolutely. It's 100% for show. And I think that's why I like the idea of the title Queerleader for you. And I for those who are watching, I made sure with Tyler that it was okay with them that I use the word queer. Queer is a word, I think in more urban areas and perhaps maybe more West Coast areas primarily, or at the beginning, queer is undergoing a reclamation, much as different words have gone as a reclamation by different, the people who they have been, those words have been hurled at. So I checked with Tyler to make sure that they were okay with queer, because that's how I also identify. But I think that's a moment where you really stood up as a queer leader, right? And you're like, no, bro, no, like no performative allyship. It's not real. And I think that the world needs more queer leaders, right? We need more people who are willing to say, I might lose social capital, but if I don't do this, then the next person will not take a stand. You know what I mean? And oh God, I hate how slow politics moves. I hate it. But someone has to be the first person that says, hold the phone. Hold the phone.
Right.
And I think that that's incredibly necessary. What was the response when you
oh my God, it got nasty. I went from being seen in this community by several of the higher ups as somebody like a rising star momentum almost, to literally being like blackballed. And I see it, and I still feel the ripple effect. And there are still many high up queer leaders here who won't talk to me because I jeopardized the relationship with the mayor and what he has done for the queer community. But he didn't do it. The queer community did it.
He jeopardized the relationship with the community. You did not. That onus is not on you.
Exactly. And so I knew that going into it, that I was going to lose allegiance, which is a gross word and concept. I was going to lose, being seen as somebody who can be a trusted leader by certain individuals within my community. But all those individuals were white. I was okay with that.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. That says a lot. And I feel like sometimes there is a hierarchy that exists within queer communities that people who aren't queer might not notice or might not be aware of. But like, because we're queer doesn't mean everybody's chill. Like the same hierarchies play themselves out. And this is a sociological fascination of mine. And it's something that I'm very sociologically informed. So like I'm in a Master's of Divinity program right now. And I ideally will progress to a PhD, probably in theology or practical theology, but everything I do is sociologically informed, right? Because nothing happens outside of sociology, right? But there's a sociological phenomenon that is particularly fascinating to me, and that's the idea of replicating the same damaging hierarchy that exists within the outside community within our communities of marginalization. So like there's a whole situation of like rainbow capitalism where pride has become about selling rainbow things from companies that aren't necessarily allies. Meanwhile, Black and brown trans voices are not represented at events. So it's so interesting to see like marginalized communities replicate systems of marginalization. Like there's a lot of communities that are very patriarchal. I know that's a big complaint that I've heard within, especially like the African American queer community, is the patriarchal nature of that community. And now I can't say that firsthand because I'm not an authority on the matter, but this is a conversation I've had with other people. And so you can begin to see like, why do we replicate those unhealthy systems if we are already the victims of them? You know what I mean? And
yeah, absolutely.
That's a big question.
Do a quick, I think a great way to demonstrate that is to do a quick overview of just the queer organizations that you see across the US, even in our state or, local, who sits at the helm? Who sits at the helm of those queer organizations? Who is represented on the board and who is not? And it puts into perspective really quick. I did a quick demographic breakdown when I was, getting ready to launch my nonprofit, and I was seeking out the money for the nonprofit, and just to look at the representation that was in the queer entities, like on the queer bodies here, and it made me sick to my stomach, and because I think when I sat down and looked. There was like 4 gender expansive people and maybe 2 Black people within those orgs, and I think we have 4 now here, and that just like speaks. And in a community and in a city where we are well over 50%, of diversity. We're a diverse city, and it blows my mind. And this could pivot us into because I always go on tangents about just nonprofits and how that really is just another form of elitists getting to control who gets to be helped and who doesn't.
That's very incredibly true. That's very true.
It frustrates the hell out of me because all it has done is pivot the marginalized and the oppressed, fighting for the same this belief that there's not enough money, and so we're all fighting for the same grants while you're watching the Jeff Bezos of the world. Literally make millions in minutes. Yeah.
And I think that's a big problem we see both in nonprofits and political systems as well. I worked for almost a decade in social work after just rapid and aggressive disenfranchisement from Christianity. But there's a saying that we have, which is there's no funding without data. And so if you look at like the move of Donald Trump to take from my understanding, it wasn't just him, because there's been a continual problem with census representation, but to have no category for anything other than male or female, to have no category for certain ethnic backgrounds, to have no category for this, that, and the other, you're removing the chance of any of these communities of marginalization being seen. And if they're not seen, they cannot be helped because there can be no funds received for them being helped. And so this is a dual problem within politics and nonprofit world that I think is often overlooked, because we can be in the streets as much as we want, right? But until, like in particular in Olean, our mayor was going to take a survey of if racism was a problem. He was going to put that survey out in the local newspaper. Who the hell is the demographic of the local newspaper? Older, retired, conservative, heterosexual, white, cisgender people. Tell me how that survey is going to reflect any change that needs to happen in the world. And you're so right. It's another form of elitism, right? Because then they have a chip on their shoulder saying, well, we took a survey and we figured out who needs to be helped, right? And it's like the old elderly white people, or, whatever it may be. That was a hypothetical. That isn't exactly what happened here, but I'm just saying, like, it's another form of elitism, and it's a form form that is it's insidious because it's not like no one fucking shot somebody in the street, but they completely negated their existence, right? And
Right.
that
Absolutely.
is problematic. And that's the thing that comes back to, especially in the political realm, that's a thing that comes back to a political issue that someone can make a difference with.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, you nailed it. Like when you start to see how legislation, policy, procedure, how that rolls out and what that actually looks like in practice, and why it's so important to have that representation to be like, wait, hold up, that's not capturing. So even just like look at COVID, right? When they started issue, like when cases were starting to come in and we were getting positive test results, there was no system in place to capture and accurately reflect any of the demographic information.
Yep.
So we could not tell right away. And this nobody will ever convince me that this was not intentional, that it was hitting marginalized communities harder.
Yes. Yes.
But what we knew it was because marginalized people don't get jobs or have a harder time getting jobs out of the front line first, those responders, those people who are still considered essential.
Yep.
And we know that as queer people, you look to like even the entertainment industry, like that's often where we are forced to have to go or choose to go. But there was no rescue happening there. And so once you saw like is crisis, and then the data started coming in, you almost saw even a pullback on responding, because they're like, oh, it's only affecting those people.
Yep.
Let's open the schools back up, or let's like, you know what I mean?
Yep.
So it became like a double. It was just constant, not just double, like it was constant. And I'm tripping over my words a lot. I'm not saying them perfect here, but I'm trying to convey that concept of why, like you said, data matters.
Yeah.
And then the power you have to eradicate any type of resource when you eliminate a few boxes on a piece of paper.
It's astounding. We had an issue maybe 2 years back here where our local library did a drag queen story hour for the beginning of Pride Month. Now, first of all, as an aside, I'm convinced that the most legitimate, effective, aggressive social justice warriors in any community are librarians and nuns, and no one can tell me any different, right? Librarians and nuns, those folks are going hard for justice. So our library was like, we're gonna hold a drag queen story hour. One person was like, bro, that's against my religion. We're gonna start a protest. And so like they people were gonna launch a protest. It literally drew in Nazis, literal Nazis that live about an hour from us, that are very out and proud about their Nazism. Pennsylvania is just a great place, let me tell you. But so this one person who was a straight white conservative Christian male said, let's start a protest. And that ended up drawing literal Nazis. But it's cool because there were 4 people that protested. And then there was about 150 counter protesters. So that tells you like the direction is moving in a good way in our area. However, in short summation, our local Title IX officer, who is the head of the special education department, literally posted a comment on Facebook about how gay people are possessed by the devil. So naturally, we decided we need to protest at a school board meeting, period. So we showed up like 50, 60 strong at the school board meeting. And out of that, there came some very, in my honest estimation, since I'm mixing no words, it was a disingenuous effort. It was an effort to subcommittee us to death. But we did come up with, we were working towards creating a diversity and equity survey to be put out by students that would be filled out by students and not parents. And it would be anonymous, right? But what they freaking did, and this is how they subcommitteed it to death, is the first question on the survey was, are you male or female? Like, how are you going to capture any information about transgender students if you literally wrote them out of existence? And this is again where we need diverse people in office to be like, are you kidding me? Like, are you kidding me? Is this what's happening right now? Like, you're going to take a survey about this? You're going to ask white people about racism? Like, these are the finer points, I think, where especially local politics, like local politics are politics. What happens in Washington is 75 years away from me intellectually and emotionally. But what happens on that survey will directly affect my transgender child being able to receive any sort of services in the school.
Absolutely. Yes. You know? Yes. And that is local politics. I almost said, local politics are so sexy. They really are. And what they can bring into the world and what there is this like appeal to them and the power. I mean, there is just so, there's just so much that can happen in local politics. And then local politics, you know, so when you're in like your township, your municipal, the school boards, the districts, those affect the county, those affect the region. And then you're starting to see this state effect that happens and rolls out. And once people start trusting. So as a non-binary person, who's been very loud and very vocal on not just queer issues, but on all issues, I'm earning the trust and respect of people who would have just heard my labels and disregarded me.
Right.
But I'm in the room, I'm at the table, and they see me as a person, and they joke with me, and they come to know about my family and my history, and I come to know about theirs. And then there is this ripple effect again that happens out. Like, it's not our job to change them, but when we're there and we can be present, it matters. It matters.
Yeah, because you put a face to something. Like, there has been multiple points at which I had a choice. My whole family is very conservative Christian. My whole system, my whole worldview is conservative Christian. I was double fisting evangelicalism for most of my life. And I need people to understand how serious that was for me, because coming out was not simply coming out. Coming out for me was a realization that I would lose everybody and everything that I held dear, including my own sense of vocation. Literally, no one fucking comes out for fun.
Right. Exactly.
It was an ability, or it was a choice that I knew that was going to cost me everything. Now, luckily, I have to say this because I love my mom super dearly. We have worked through this, and we've come back to a place where my mom is truly one of my best friends in the whole world. She apologized to me for like how things went when I came out, and I couldn't. It was just this past year, and as an apology, I never thought I was going to get, and it changed my whole life. But I think the reason that was able to happen was because I was able to stay in my family and to just be me. And I think that's a lot of what you're saying there, is by just being you. I think it's Audre Lorde, who was a Black lesbian activist, right? But she said that to be me as an act of political, I don't know if she said political warfare.
Yeah, I think she said, is it political resistance? Like
political
my
resistance.
resistance. Yeah.
Yeah, my existence as political resistance, and I will put that real quote in the show notes somewhere. Don't worry, people. But it's so true, because at some point, it is necessary for minority and diverse individuals to just show up. And now, this is not to put the onus on people who are not emotionally ready. I want to be very careful when I say that, because I recognize that I have a certain skill set and a certain level of privilege in having been able to access counseling, and a certain level of safety within my family, speaking of my partner and my children. So I have a certain level of privilege that affords me the ability to be out. But I do think that it is important that people from marginalized communities, when they find themselves able to, step up and fill those roles in public, because they need, by they, I mean, like, the people in power need to see you as a complete being that is not a monolith, right? I am queer. I am an artist. I am a parent. I am a business owner. I am an activist. I am an author. Like, I am all these things, and people need to see that, right? In the same way that people need to see all of the wonderful, beautiful, complicated, rich facets of brown women, of indigenous communities, like the powers that be need to see those people represented. They need to see diversity represented. And so in that way, I think representation becomes critical, not only to people who may be in that category, but also to the people who are diametrically opposite. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And I think you said a point that I will go round and round with people on, and because we hear so often, like, you have to be out, like you have to be out, but you and we were talking about this before we went on, is sometimes you can't, and so I do think that when we have that space of safety and resources and backing, I guess there's two ends of this, right? Like, because you think about those like Marsha B. Johnson and like Sylvia Rivera, who came out because and were there because there was no other option. There was no other option. And for those of us who do have options, when we have those options and we're in that space where it's safe, we need to, like you said, to step into those spaces where we can carry a load that shouldn't be placed upon those who are fighting to have their daily needs met.
Yes, and I think that's exactly it. I think it's a like a Maslow's hierarchy of needs things. Anybody who has known me for more than 2 seconds knows that I really love Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I jokingly talk about getting it tattooed on me because it's so important. For those of you who are watching who might not have heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's a diagram. It's like a triangle, right? And there's different tiers to this triangle. And at the very top tier is self-actualization, and at the bottom tier is things like eating and housing and physical safety. And the idea is that it is exponentially improbable for people to reach self-actualization when these underlying rungs of personal needs are not met. Now, that is not to say impossible, because it's a model, it's a theoretical model, and those do tend to fall short sometimes. But we need to realize that, like, if we are able to progress up that ladder, we need to do our best to support people that might be struggling on that bottom ladder. You know what I mean? And so we need to be able to use that space that we have, and we need to be cognizant of where we're at too, because sometimes, like, I'm not going to lie, sometimes I'm not at self-actualization and I need to pull back for a minute. You know what I mean? And that's a self-care piece, but we need to be aware, right, that there's a lot of times, there's a lot of people who are in marginalized communities and they cannot step up because they are hungry or they are subject to, you know, a greater risk of police brutality. There's all sorts of reasons. And I think that we have to bear that hierarchy in mind when we look about our ability and willingness to engage in, you know, local politics and activism.
And I think the other piece that is so important too is that we don't demand a person show up and articulate the harm that is being caused in a specific way.
Yes.
Right. Like,
yeah.
We cannot say that you have to, you know, keep a temperament, a tone, linguistically match our cadence.
There is no room for tone policing.
No, there isn't. And I really get frustrated, and I get frustrated when people, you know, like, oh, they're so angry, or why are they so aggressive? I'm like, okay, you go through centuries of brutalization and then be really happy to continue the conversation in a really nice, polite way, in front of people who are voting on whether you matter as a human.
Exactly. I think that's a really important point too, because I have a ton of proximity to Black and brown people in my life. Just without telling you like my entire life story, which I'll do for your viewers, I'll do it another time. But, the communities and the spaces and the people that supported me most when I came out were Black and brown, like Afro-Caribbean, Afro-Hispanic communities in Harlem. And so I've had the privilege of learning by proximity to so many people there. And I've learned that everybody's response to a situation is valid, and we cannot tone police another person, because that is not okay. And by tone policing, I mean, like Tyler said, you can't show up and you can't tell them you need to communicate in this way. Like, this person has been through an entire lifetime that I cannot understand, and I'm not going to tone police them. And so I try to function as a white ally, right? I need to stop saying white. I would say light skinned. As a light skinned ally, right? I need to function in a way where I can help other light skinned or white people understand why people are mad when things like Juneteenth are run by white people, or why people are mad when Black history is spoken about in a certain way. So I try to be a little bit of a bridge in those communities, in those intersecting areas of privilege and marginalization, to explain to people, like, they might seem angry and you might think, well, why are they telling white people to not do this? But you've also got to understand that, like, they have every right to be angry. And so I try to personally really facilitate that dialogue, because, like, Black people have every right to be pissed about, like, white people running Black History Month, or white people defining what Black history is put forward. Like, they have every right to be mad. And so I try to be a little bit of a bridge between marginalized communities in that way. And I think that sort of bridge building between marginalized communities is a really, really like a noble not noble. I'm not trying to make myself noble, but it's a necessary and an
It
integral
is, yeah.
part of coalition building, you know?
Trevor, I don't know if you listen to Trevor Noah, but my wife loves Trevor Noah. Okay. And like he did a segment over the summer, you know, when he was like shooting from his phone, much better phone than what I have, but whatever. And he's talking about how we cannot expect communities who are not part of the social code to begin with, who we've exiled from the social code.
Yep,
to then
systemically
uphold,
exiled. Yep.
to uphold then the social code.
Yeah.
So we cannot tell people that we can murder you in the streets, literally. We can shoot you in the streets, to then not want to throw a brick. Like, I mean, we cannot say we can kill you. We can kill you on TV. And then we expect you to then follow the social constructs that we've created.
Yeah, like this is a huge thing currently. Like, how do you want Black people to protest? They've knelt, they've marched, they've sat, they've been silent, they've come to congressional hearings, and yet they're still being lynched readily, right?
Yeah.
And so you cannot like legislate what you're not willing to protect. You can't. It's not
absolutely
fair.
Absolutely. And I can feel like I'm having like pull my hoodie down, because I'm like, I can let so much steam out. Like this topic gets me so fired up. And you know, this was actually grew up in a very rural area, grew up in Titusville, very conservative. I call them, I'm not even gonna say that out loud. Anyway, there's a
I lived in Pleasantville, by the way, so I'm familiar.
Oh, so you totally get it, right? Yeah. I always jokingly say, like, there's different types of Democrats, right? Like there's just different type of Democrats. There's more that are like conservative, and there's more that are like leaning towards the AOC Dems and the Biden Dems. We'll just say it politically correct, right? Okay. Yep. So whatever. But I'm very outspoken, and I'm more of an AOC Dem. And so there's me, and then my sister, who's 11 months younger than me, is a state trooper. And so when this all went down over the summer, I have biracial nephews and nieces. My wife is brown. Things started to unravel. And I was very outspoken about, you know, I did the public, you know, resignation with the mayor, and outspoken with, you know, Black Lives Matter is the minimum. That's the minimum.
Bare minimum.
Bare minimum, right? We're just trying to get to the bare minimum, and which is a whole nother tangent. But it was a complete divide in my family. And at that point, I lost. It was like, so as me staying true to moral justice, lost access to my family. Like, I was uninvited from family events. That's part of the discussion we don't really have as light-skinned people, is when you take the right side, when you stand up, you will then have to, like, you will most likely lose people you love, just like, you know, the coming out process. There's a grief that you're gonna have to, like, that white guilt, that grief that you're gonna have to navigate as you possibly say goodbye to some people that you used to sit across from at the dinner table, or you know what I mean? So there's this thing that we need to face, and we need to be ready to say and set those boundaries, because again, the burden cannot continue to be carried by the oppressed population. Like, it cannot, by that community. If they are being harmed, the least we can do is set a boundary that says, you can't talk about people like this. Well,
absolutely.
You know,
yeah, because much like local politics starts this bigger building ripple process, so do our interpersonal conversations, right?
Absolutely.
And especially if we look at those interpersonal conversations in terms of our spheres of influence, right? So we have influence on our families, we have influence on our children, we have influence on our friends, and then we have influence on our social acquaintances, and we have influences on our peers and our coworkers, and it all begins to be able to build something bigger. It's very much a grassroots model, right? I don't know if you were ever into punk rock, but I super was when I was younger, like super was. Like I was in a punk band. I had a skateboard and like I rode it a lot. I was never very good at it. That's why I didn't say I was like a skateboarder, but you know what I mean? Like I was into that whole punk rock DIY ethos, and we did that with our band, like from the grounds up. You know what I mean? Guerrilla marketing. And that's what we have to do. Each and every one of us has to commit to doing that in order to create this big change that will eventually reach, you know, the halls of power in our nation. You know what I mean? With that being said, so tell me why you are moving forward and seeking a different office, right? So you're currently council president and you're running for county executive.
So I'm currently a school board president and I'm running for county executive, and I'm running for county executive because that person oversees like it's all of human services and the public departments, right? And so the very people who are servicing, there is revenue to be made there, but this is primarily like those who are serving the city and those within the county, like who reside within those spaces. And there has never been a minority person in this position. There hasn't been. And that's not okay, right? That's not okay. And again, I'm the more palpable, and I know that aesthetically, I'm the more palpable minority person. And especially because I wear flannels and blue jeans because they're really comfortable. And so I know
it's a vestige of your lesbianism.
Yes, it is. That was the best part, is I didn't actually have to do any wardrobe updating. Same thing since 9th grade. And it has been like this. That's just
I love it. I love it.
But that's why this oversees all, like we're talking about the Office of Children and Youth. I'm stationed within the courthouse. So I'm overseeing and interacting with the judges who are doing sentences. I oversee the prison. I oversee, just like public works, all those places and spaces where we know systemic discrimination is happening. And it's devastating when it happens. Like when we look at the juvenile detention or adult probation or, OCY, we know what communities are overrepresented. And so why there should be more, marginalized, oppressed people. I even hate the word minority. I really hate the word minority because we're not, you know what I mean? But people who aren't cis, white, straight, and able-bodied, we need diversity there. And that's why. That is why I'm running. This is what I have built my life around, is serving. I am a servant. And I don't mean that like I mean that and I'm a servant of people, of life, of others. And I will forever be. It is where my cup fills up, even though it drains me. I have to be in acts of service to others. And I have to show that to myself too, but this is why I'm seeking the spot, is because we need people who have those lived experiences.
Oh my goodness. And I mean, when you broke down that position, in terms of ripple effect, that's massive. Right, because you're talking and being able to help in all of those areas.
Yes.
Right. And so even if you're the person in that position that's like, hold the phone, who thought that was a good idea? You get to be that person. I mean, you have that breadth and oversight in that position. What's the race shaping up to look like for you? Like, how are you going up against an incumbent? What are you?
So there's no incumbent. The incumbent announced that they weren't running again for re-election. They've served 2 terms, their 4-year term. And so right now we've got 4 Democrats into the party and we've got 2 Republicans. So the Republicans, you get through the primary and then you focus on the general. So it's like you're running 2 different races. So right now there's 4 of us that are running for the Democratic nomination. Polar opposites. Well, there's 2 of us that are pretty similarly aligned. And we've actually sat down a couple times now for great discussion. But she's still a cis white person, and I say that with all the love in the world, because I have a ton of respect for this person, but there's still an element of lack of representation that can't be ignored there.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is there's nothing against cis white people. Like, it's just a fact of the matter. You know what I mean? And maybe it's a moment for, especially your local Democratic Party to step up and kind of show their mettle in terms of what do you really value. No, I say that with a bit of maybe an eyebrow raise, because I feel like there's not really a truly progressive section in America. It's kind of just like slightly off kilter to the left of center, kind of.
Yeah.
But I do think it's time. I mean, speaking nationally, it's certainly time for the Democrats to be like, hey, man, you know, all those black people that voted for us, maybe we should help them. You know what I mean?
Right. And that's what blows, and this is what blows my mind, is people are like, how do the Republicans keep doing it? I'm like, because they have got the unity down pat. Once they have made a decision, they have made a decision.
Yep.
And come hell or high water, they are backing that person.
Absolutely.
And we've seen that, and that is how they get through. You know, even with the POTUS, like that was how Trump got through. Like it was like a hell or high water, and they stood by this person with loyalty that is devastating. But if we were to unify in the same way, but on the side of justice and equity, the power is just as intense there.
Oh my goodness. That would change everything, right? That would change absolutely everything. Yeah, man. Wow. That would be an amazing position. I genuinely did not know what the title of county executive would hold for you. Now, I've seen some stuff by following your local Facebook page, and this is just I guess this is a question that lends to the idea of what it takes to be a public, you know, a minority. But how have you been received in your campaign? Because I read a study once that said Erie PA was like the city in the United States that was most resistant to change. And so tell me about how it has been being on the campaign trail as an out queer person who is unapologetically intersectional and diverse.
So in all honesty, do I get hate mail? Yeah. Do I get nasty grams? Yeah. But those pale in comparison to the outright support that I truly receive as an individual. And it is because I don't run on platitudes. I run on genuine platform and genuine investment in the issues. And I have stood up for things that, you know, that made sense and that helped not just benefit me, but helped benefit those who needed the benefit the most. And I've earned the respect, and I guess, I don't know, like there's a lot of like bridging the gap discussion that happens. Growing up in a rural area, I understand the same barriers. Like I watched what happened to my family. Like my stepfather was a self-employed logger. My mother, you know, worked at the WIC office and then put herself back through LPN school when I was 16. And then they became foster parents. And so I've seen every side of the system, and I understand rural culture. I understand what they're enduring. And I think that is what people see when they talk with me. It's like, I don't assume just because you're in the country that you're a bigot.
Right.
Because
absolutely.
You're not.
Yep. It's not a given.
Right. Do we see a lot of rural people coming forward and having like misnomers and a lack of understanding? Yeah. But we also, I can't tell you how many times actually I've also seen rural people come forward and literally give their shirt off the back to a stranger. Right.
Absolutely.
Like, so it's, country hearts are some of the most pure hearts that I've met. And so I think when I'm out on the campaign trail, that is people see me as a person, and I've earned that from my commitment to all people within this community.
Absolutely. Man, that's huge and so exciting. And I also have 20 other things that I need to talk to you about off camera, because that's just like me as a person. I'm actually going to be working on a research project vis-a-vis the topic of queer people who come out in rural environments and that experience versus that's kind of countercultural to the narrative of like fleeing to urban centers as a queer person. So we'll talk about that later. But I want to kind of wrap us up here, because I want to, you know, honor the fact that you jumped on tonight and give you back to your partner and your kids at some point. So, but I would have to say, like, okay, so I have a couple of questions for you. First one is like, if you would define your own sense of personal spirituality, giving this body of work that we've just heard from you and hearing your true heart on these matters, like, what do you think it is that matters, that pushes, that drives you forward, and that you base your life around, that is beyond just the tangible? Like, what does that mean to you? How would you define that for yourself? Just because I'm curious.
So I often like refer to, so my youngest believes in like God and prays to God. And there was a time where I did too. My oldest is more leaning towards Wiccan and being connected with like spirituality and earth and nature and how those all intertwine. I would say that I'm like somewhere in the middle, and I kind of compare my spirituality to that of like water. You know, like there is a truth that exists and it flows and connects all of us. But to try to capture, like, how do you describe water, right? Yeah. Like, or, you know, but it's there regardless of our understanding, regardless of our acknowledgement of it. It is there, and that is kind of what I literally refer to it as the truth, right? The truth is there, and that source is there, whether I understand it, whether I've come to terms with it, whatever it is, right? And I will work towards that truth forever.
Yeah, because it's like that thing that's pulling you forward, right? It's pulling you forward. I have this my Instagram, no, not Instagram, my Twitter and TikTok handle. I just recently changed because I've been trying to like really who is Leo and who am I moving forward into this new phase of my life. Where I'm in seminary and I was a Christian, but like, what am I? I don't know. You know what I mean? All of these things coming together. How do I describe it? So I've actually, my handle on TikTok and Twitter is actually spiritually NB, LeoWT, meaning spiritually non-binary, because it's definitely there. But I've found throughout all of my studies and experiences and intersectional interfaith experiences, I've found that there's more happening that draws us to the same conclusions than pulls us away. So if you're interested in following that journey, feel free, right? Conversations as a literal fleshing out of that, and you can see it on all my other channels too, but that's kind of in that vein of understanding. So I haven't asked that of my previous guests, but I think I am going forward because I think it's going to be interesting to hear. My last question would be, well, second to last question would be, if there was one thing, like say everybody was going to only listen to 1 minute of this video or podcast, what would you put in that minute? What would you say?
I would want them to know that everybody has a space and place of power, and we have a space and place in which we can use that power to cause out a ripple. Every voice and presence matters. God, and your lived experience is valid. There will be so many people who are going to tell you that it's not real and it's not valid, and it is. You matter, and it is so valid. What you experience is so valid. And be, God, fuck culture, like just like fuck social constructs. Like be your own version of beautiful. Like you define it and what it means to you. That is what I would want people. You don't owe the world anything but you.
I love that. I love that. And I also love that you started that by saying we all do have our own spaces and places of power, because I think that's something that helped me, particularly when I was coming out of evangelicalism and coming out, was the realization, like, I felt like so much was being taken from me, and I felt like I was giving up everything to be myself. But one of the things that kept my anxiety at bay, a mentor of mine told me, like, you always have some amount of power in a situation. And maybe your amount of power is super tiny right now, but you as a person who has agency and value and insight because of your lived experience, you have some measure of power. And just on the worst days, just try to grab onto that little measure of power and use it. I really like that. My last question for you is much less esoteric than the last two. But how can people get in touch with you if they'd like to get in touch with you more, to follow your work, to give you support, bake you cookies? I don't know, whatever. But how can people get in touch with you?
So I'm like super creative on my handles, right? You can literally go to tylertitus.com. Like just go type in my name. I'm on I think I'm Dr. Tyler on TikTok, or it might be Dr. Tyler Titus. And then on Instagram, it's the same, elect Tyler.
Okay.
I'm really not very creative.
No,
but
that's
if you
great.
go to like the tylertitus.com, you'll see my page. And then you can follow me on Insta, where I also talk about my nonprofit, which we didn't even get into because I'm still like, I don't know if I want it to be a nonprofit, but it only serves queer people, especially queer youth. So.
Awesome. Very cool. Yeah, I've actually been following that. So we'll have to have you back on. I have a couple of folks that I'm going to be bringing back on kind of in the fall, and it would be exciting to hear from you more about that and to see how the campaign is progressing and such. So we'll have to bring you back on. But for those of you who heard all that, I'm going to do my best to put that all in the show notes on the podcast, in the captions on YouTube, and then in the comments on Facebook. So we'll get Tyler's info out there for all of you folks there. Thank you guys so much for watching. Tyler Tyler, thank you so much for being
This was
here.
a blast. Thank you.
It was great. I can't wait to have you back again. And I really, truly thank you for being you and doing what you're doing and having the courage you have to just be you in the world. We definitely wish you the best. And I can't wait to have you back on Conversations.
Thank you. Did you see my kid just like almost try to stab me with a pen to get my attention? Oh my God. That's a great way. Like, Dad, like,
yeah, right there. Like, come here. I think my wife is texting me too. So I think the universe is telling us it's time to log off. But
yes.
Thank you so much for your time.
You.
Thank your wife for her tech help. And we will have you back on here sometime soon, my friend. Have a good night. Bye, everybody.
This has been the Conversations Podcast. Thank you so much for joining. If you have any questions or comments or just want to get involved, feel free to join the conversation on social media. You can find us at Conversations Official on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And please don't forget to rate, follow, and share this podcast. We're available on Anchor, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you so much for joining the conversation.